0345 6060 973, and you can watch us on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Rishi Sunak says he's confident a new deal between the UK and France will reduce the number of people crossing the channel in small boats. More police officers, money and technology will be allocated to help stop people smuggling gangs. Labour's Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says the measures should have come sooner.
Of course, it's right to have the increased coastal patrols and intelligence sharing, but to be honest, these should have been happening a long time ago.
Dominic Raab's office says he holds himself to the highest standards of professionalism after 8 of his former staff reported being bullied. They'd been working under the then Foreign Secretary in 2019. Speaking to LBC, former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office, Simon MacDonald, said the accusations are plausible. Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping have condemned Russia's nuclear threats to Ukraine. The leaders met for the first time since the US president came to office almost 2 years ago ahead of a G20 summit in Indonesia. 10 men will serve more than 140 years in prison between them for their parts in armed robberies across England. £400,000 was taken from cash vans in London, Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire and Northamptonshire. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 67 points at 73.85. The pound buys $1.17 and €1.13. LBC weather: wet and windy in western areas tonight, lows of 8. Outbreaks of rain from the west tomorrow, drier and brighter later in Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England, highs of 13 Celsius. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Monday's edition of Cross Question. The number to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel is 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850 or you can use Alexa. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. It's as simple as that. And, of course, you can watch us on Global Player. And who wouldn't want to watch this brilliant panel? Kim Leadbeater is Labour MP for Batley and Spen. I think you're the only one on the panel that's been on the programme before, Kim.
I've never been on this programme before.
Have you not?
No.
So you're all debutantes. This is fantastic. Angela Richardson is Conservative MP for Guildford. James Dowling is a former special advisor at the Department of Work and Pensions and the Ministry of Justice, and he's now works for the communications consultancy Lansons. And Aubrey Allegretti is political correspondent for The Guardian. So treat them gently, ask some really good questions, and you never know, you might get some fantastic answers. 0345 6060 973.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, let's go to our first caller. It's Anthony in Blackpool. Anthony, hello. What would you like to ask?
Hello. Yes, hi, Ian. What are the objections to reopening safe routes for asylum seekers?
Now, I normally wouldn't go to somebody who's making their debut first, but I have to because you're all making your debut. So, Kim, I'm going to go to you first, if that's all right.
What are the objections to opening safe routes? Well, goodness knows. That's absolutely what we should be doing. That's one of the key ways of solving the crisis that we find ourselves in when it comes to migrants trying to cross the channel. The reason that people are doing that and taking their lives in their hands, and we've got the absolute mess that we've got, is because there quite frankly aren't enough safe routes of passage for people who are fleeing persecution. So I'm not entirely sure what the government's objections are, but it's something that clearly the Labour Party would be fully supporting. We have to have safe routes for people to enter this country.
Wouldn't so-called safe routes act as a bit of a magnet, though, so you'd get far more people applying?
Well, I think we also need to be looking at having a points-based system for immigration. We need to be looking at what the criteria are. Well, a better points-based system than we've got now. Or clearly, you know, something's not working, isn't it? I wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. So I think we need to be looking at just tightening up the whole asylum process and immigration system that we have. It is an absolute mess. And I sat in Parliament, was it last week or the week before, when, Rishi Sunak admitted that the system is broken, but we have to look at why it's broken and who broke it. So I think absolutely talking about safe routes of passage for those who are genuinely seeking asylum is a crucial part of a forward plan.
Isn't part of the problem is that the asylum system was never designed to cope with this level of people coming across the channel, and that's why or at least in part why the Home Office are being so slow. I think 4,000 people were processed in the whole of the last 12 months when you have 50 or 60,000 people applying.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the system is not fit for purpose, but we've got to look at where the responsibility lies for that. And we can go back further than 12 years, and I wasn't in politics at that time. I'm sure there's arguments to be had about that. But ultimately, we have a government that's been in power for 12 years. So when they stand there and admit the system is broken, they have to take some responsibility for that. And the mistakes that they've made as part of that system and that scheme, spending £140 million on the Rwanda deal and not one single person has been deported, that is a disgrace. Particularly when we put that alongside the cost of living crisis, and we've got people who can't pay their bills and feed their kids. This is really, really bad management of the economy, as well as the immigration system.
James Dowling, you've worked in 3 government departments. Unfortunately, you've never worked in the Home Office, so we can't blame you.
I'm not that upset. I've never worked in the Home Office, actually. But I think I agree with both of you, actually. I mean, you started off by saying, shouldn't we reopen, we should have safe routes for asylum seekers. Iain, in response, you said, isn't one of the problems that our system isn't set up to deal with this. And that is exactly the problem. We've never had really a system that's been designed to take the level of migration that, for example, Germany has had to process. Until we do, we're going to have these episodic issues. This is just the latest in a whole range of problems we've had with immigration over the past few years.
What about the issue of safe routes, though? Because a lot of people think that is at least part of the solution, if not the major part of the solution.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, I think those safe routes have to be combined with a system that's able to cope with what we're then going to receive. And I think that is the problem, is that we simply haven't had that. So, in the wake of the Afghan crisis, or actually more recently during Ukraine, we saw a system that was really creaking. And it was creaking because we've never had to deal with the kind of volume of immigration that we are now, that frankly the public expects the system to be able to deal with. And you're now seeing this through boats across the Channel, and there are a number of issues there. And it's not just the processing of the asylum seekers; it's the catching of them before that. But I think you need both. It's very simple for me to say it, but you need both those things before this is a problem that I think the public's going to be happy with.
OK, let's return to the question, which is from Anthony in Blackpool. What are the objections to reopening safe routes for asylum seekers? Aubrey Allegretti from The Guardian.
Well, one of the government's arguments is, of course, that there are dedicated safe routes for the countries or people fleeing the countries that need it the most, i.e. Afghanistan and Ukraine. I think the problem is, as you were sort of touching on before, is that the government's got itself into a bit of a mess over the costs, and setting up some of these sort of safe routes is likely to incur quite a significant sort of front-loaded cost, which the government probably wouldn't be keen to shoulder the sort of negative press that it would receive, partly, from the Conservative press, but also from the Conservative backbenchers as well. I think the issue is, if you look at the way that multiple Home Secretaries have tried to deal with this crisis, I was reading back on a deal that Theresa May signed when she was Home Secretary in 2016 that was sort of heralded as a landmark deal that back then was going to sort of stem the flow of migrants arriving in small boats across the Channel. It's obviously escalated significantly since then because they've managed quite successfully to shut down the arrival of people on lorries through Dover. Yeah. So the longer this goes on, the more that these sort of deals are proclaimed as being sort of landmark moments, the less the public will have faith that these are what we're told that they will be. And the failure to grapple with the actual issue at hand feels more and more sort of exposed.
And the opposition are talking a lot about safe routes, but there are political dangers in that, aren't there, for the Labour Party?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, immigration is an issue on which Labour hasn't sat terribly comfortably for some years, mostly in the aftermath of Brexit. We're sort of seeing a slightly more nuanced and intelligent debate about that now, but they've been on a bit of a journey. And
haven't we all?
Well, yes. We're sort of forced to be, yes.
Angela Richardson, to answer the question about safe routes, first of all.
Yeah, I think grateful to Anthony for raising that. I think it's difficult. We've got to sort of separate this out a little bit from what we're seeing in terms of migrants coming across the Channel and the safe routes that have been offered by this country, who has been very generous in its support for people who are fleeing war and persecution. Aubrey mentioned the Ukrainians and Afghanistan. We've got to add Hong Kongers to that list as well, and the Syrian resettlement scheme that we had a few years ago. And so we're trying to take as many people as we possibly can from those sorts of circumstances. But I think it's also...
But the figures don't show that, do they? If you compare the numbers that France and Germany in particular take compared to us, we're not taking our fair share, are we?
Well, I think we're sort of endeavouring to do the best that we possibly can in order to work with our partners and deal with what is a global problem that we all have to participate in and do our best to support people who are fleeing persecution. But I think it's important that if you're looking in the context of the small boats crossing, which is pretty much where this question will be set at the moment, nobody is fleeing persecution if they're currently in France, because that is a safe country. It's a third country. And I think we have to tackle these small boat crossings as a priority, because if we don't, if you're talking about costs to the taxpayer, we're only going to see that go up and up as
But
we
it's
have
clearly
more and
not
more
working
people
at the
come
moment,
across.
is it? Because, I mean, we're spending £7 million a day on hotels. The money that we're sending to France to try and alleviate the problem, it's not working. Would one thing be to just say, like Germany and Sweden have done, if you come from Albania, you're just going straight back?
Well, I believe there's a task force that's been set up to deal particularly with Albania, to make sure there is a quick turnaround time for people who are effectively economic migrants who are looking for a better life. And, you know, I'm a migrant. I'm from New Zealand.
I was trying to work out where you're at.
I'm from New Zealand, and so I came on a 2-year working visa to this country. Had I not met a dashing English gentleman and got married and settled down and had 3 children, then, you know, I would have gone back at the end of my 2-year working visa, and I would have taken back experience and skills that I would have been able to use in my country of origin. But I think we have to tackle the Albanian part of what's coming over. I think it's about a quarter of the migrants who have come over on the small boats. And it's a model that has been set up that is making a huge amount of money for people back in Albania who are organising these routes, but it's not safe.
So what about the safe routes, which Anthony's asking about? I mean, Aubrey rightly pointed out that there are some safe routes, but of course people are arguing that there maybe should be a reception centre at Calais or somewhere on the North French coast for people to go to and be processed, and so they don't embark on that crossing.
Well, I think we should look at everything that's available to us in terms of options to try and sort this out. This is a global problem. This isn't just a problem for the UK. We need to help people who are genuinely fleeing from persecution or from war. There will be other reasons that people want to move. Part of that migration is down to climate change, and we need to be doing our bit with our global partners to tackle that as well. To put in place, you know, we're doing a lot with financing that we've agreed to through COP, and that was, you know, the discussions that the Prime Minister was having last week, and also with President Macron to discuss not only that, but to put the building blocks in place for the agreement that was reached today in Paris. And I think that agreement is important, and it's important for people to realise that if we have an investment right at the source, then that will pay off in the long term across the country.
Aubrey, it's noticeable today that Suella Braverman's language was, shall we say, slightly more temperate than her previous outing in the House of Commons. Was that deliberate, do you think?
Yeah, she's playing to different audiences at different times, isn't she? I mean, she was obviously over in France, and so there was a need to appear a bit more sort of magnanimous, friendly, the word that the Rishi Sunak government is using to describe the relationship with Macron that sort of famously evaded Liz Truss. But she's realised that she has to be grown up completely about this and not just play to the gallery within her own party, and voters as well. Don't forget, there are a significant proportion of voters that will also like to hear that as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear, we saw some pretty disgusting language from Suella Braverman recently talking about an invasion. That is not helpful. I've spent a lot of my time before coming into politics looking at how we build strong communities where everybody feels welcome and we have a sense of togetherness, and actually having a Home Secretary who uses such divisive language I think is really worrying. You're absolutely right, Angela. There's lots of things that need to change. I mean, yes, Albania, we've got an issue there with people coming from Albania, but why aren't we working more closely with Albania? That's how we need to be solving that problem.
How do you know we're not?
Great. Well, there's not much evidence of it, is there, to be fair? France, great, we've suddenly realised that French people are our friends and we should be working together with them. But sadly, we've had the last few years where this government has been so focused on looking internally and dealing with its own crises and mismanagement of...
Well, I think that's true, but I mean, Rishi Sunak seems to be striking a very different tone with the French, doesn't he? I mean, he and Emmanuel Macron are having a bit of a bromance.
Oh, don't get me wrong, that bromance is beautiful to see, and it's wonderful that we're seeing that, but it's very, very late in the day for starting to have those conversations, isn't it? And again, I go back to my previous point about 12 years of a government that have been so busy, particularly in the last few years, sorting their own problems out or trying to sort their own problems out, that we have lost our reputation on the global stage, and other countries are, quite frankly, laughing at the mess.
Is that a fair criticism, James?
I think we have done ourselves a lot of damage over the past few years by looking very, very obsessed with our own politics at the expense of our wider reputation, and that comes out, when you get a prime minister or a prime ministerial candidate speculating openly about whether another head of government is a friend or a foe, that has an impact. Now, Sunak has made a marked change of tone, and short term, hopefully that gives you deals like we saw Suella Braverman announcing today. Ultimately, if we want to get out of the productivity slump we're in, we actually need better relationships across borders to help. Well,
we might come on to a subject related to that in just a moment. Anthony, thank you very much for your question. You're listening to Cross Question. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
We are with Kem Leadbeater, Labour MP for Batley and Spen, Angela Richardson, Conservative MP for Guildford, James Dowling, former Government Special Advisor, now Communications Consultant, and Aubrey Allegretti, Political Correspondent for The Guardian. Let's go to our next call. It's from Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Ian and panel. Yeah, and the question is who will the Tory tax rises and cuts it the most on Thursday? Richie Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, or the poorest?
Let's combine that with an Alexa question from Thompson, who says, how long do you think that the next recession will last, and will we be out of it by the next general election? Aubrey, let's start with you.
Well, the brutal answer is I think we don't know, but everybody has basically been braced and told there will be tax rises that affect you. I mean, seeing commuters on the tube this morning reading papers with that front pages, it was pretty hard not to sort of escape how grim it must feel to be somebody who is preparing for that to sort of fall on your lap, when about a month ago you wouldn't have probably expected this situation. So it's going to be a really difficult week. Speaking to a lot of Conservative MPs, they're feeling pretty glum, realising that even though there's been this sort of I suppose unity that's been presented since Rishi Sunak came into number 10, that this has all been watching and waiting, knowing the inevitable, that there's going to be really bad news dished out on Thursday. It may be that it's not as bad as we've been led to believe.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because there is part of me that thinks we're being built up for all of these terrible tax rises and spending cuts all over government that will hit everybody. And then the Chancellor might say, well, I had thought about doing this, but actually our finances aren't quite as bad as we thought, and therefore we're not going to have to take all these sort of more extreme measures. I mean, do you think there's a chance of that happening?
Yeah, it's all part of the sort of psychological manipulation, so that when things are announced they don't appear as bad as they could have been. And I think Jeremy Hunt's probably attempted to head off accusations, like we saw with Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget, that this was something that was going to disproportionately benefit richer people, because we saw those stories about the top rate of tax band being lowered so that more people would be drawn into it. So you'd be paying, if you were £125,000, which is, I believe, more than what cabinet ministers will be paying, they would have a good argument to be able to say to the public, well, we've put ourselves into a tax band we weren't in previously, or we're putting more people, the sort of the super rich, the top 5%, say, into that. That will probably be one of the key planks of their argument, to say that this is something that everybody's going to have to shoulder.
Angela Richardson, let's come to you. As a Tory MP, what are you hoping from Thursday, and what are you fearing from Thursday? Because you represent a relatively well-off constituency, don't you? So your constituents are probably going to be affected by this in a way that maybe some others won't be.
Yes, so my constituency, I suppose, is relatively well off, although I do have pockets of deprivation, and they suffer from double deprivation because they live right next door to people who can weather the storm. So I think that both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have been quite clear that there are tough decisions that have to be taken, that the context that we're in is that we do have to fill a fiscal hole of 50-60 billion pounds that we're talking about.
So is austerity Mark 2 we're going to get then?
So there, I don't know what the balance is going to be like in terms of spending difficulties and any sort of tax rises. I think that will all be come clear on Thursday. I think, one of the bits of the question was, are we going to have a recession? I think it's predicted that we are going to be in a recession for about 2 years. It's not going to be as deep as the recession was with the global financial crisis. I think it's going to be a lot shallower. But the key thing for Thursday that I'm looking for is to make sure that there's nothing that's inflationary as part of the announcements that are coming out, because inflation is the one thing that we have to all tackle together. It's a national endeavour to tackle inflation, a little bit like we had to come together to help tackle the pandemic as well. It's not going to be easy for anyone.
You're seriously putting it on that level?
No, but some commentators have over the since September the 23rd, when we had the mini fiscal event, they were talking about the difficulties that we're facing off the back of that as being really, really difficult for people. It's difficult because in the pandemic, there was a lot of protection that happened to lives and livelihoods through action that the Chancellor took. You know, we ended up spending over £400 billion to try and protect lives and livelihoods. And what that means in some ways, in the last 10 years, we've got very strong fundamentals with the economy. We have seen we're the third highest growing country in the G7 in terms of our GDP, and we've got unemployment.
Well, we won't be soon if you're right and there's a 2-year recession. And how do you win an election in the middle of a recession?
But the thing is, there is high inflation and low growth all across Europe. This isn't just a UK problem. This is a problem facing Europe. It's a problem facing the US. The US have got different background to their sort of situation. You know, the inflation, it's in the economy at the moment is not driven by the same factors it is in the US. And I think, had we come out of COVID, there were things that we were able to do. You know, the Chancellor put in place a £39 billion the current Prime Minister, when he was Chancellor, put in place a cost of living support that was about £39 billion back in April, and people are seeing that directly into their bank accounts now. So over the winter, £1,200 is going to 8 million families across the country, which is really important. We are doing what we can to support the most vulnerable. We will continue to do that. That's what I hope for. That's what I expect to see on Thursday.
Kim Leadbeater, let's get back to Martin's question. Who will Tory tax rises and cuts hit the most, Hunt and Rishi, or the poorest?
Right, I'm not going to hit the desk because you've asked me not to, but I am feeling really cross about this. And Angela, no disrespect, but it's a really lovely sentiment to think that we're all going to have to pull together because times are tough. But actually, the reason times are tough for so many people in Doncaster, where Martin is, and in Batley and Spen, in my constituency in Yorkshire, is because of the mismanagement of the economy over the last 12 years by the Conservative government. This is not something that, you know, we couldn't have controlled much better than we have done. Of course, there are international pressures.
Yeah, but why are other European countries experiencing exactly the same thing then?
If we look at the statistics, we are the only country.
Done your prep.
I've done my prep. I always do my prep, Ian. But we're the only country in the G7 to see negative growth in the third quarter of this year. And we're the only G7 economy that's
we're
still
in the third quarter
smaller.
this year. The figures aren't out yet.
Well, the growth so far is negative.
Can I just say Germany is predicted to have a 0.6% contraction.
But also I think the other point is, and we're also the only G7 economy that is still smaller than its pre-COVID level. But also getting into that whole comparison thing is all well and good, but actually we're in a mess. And the reason we're in a mess is partly because of years of mismanagement of the economy, but also, let's be clear, you know, that dreadful 45 days of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng
doing... It was 49.
49 days. God, have I raised it from my memory? It was that bad, Ian. But, you know, that's the reason we're in this mess. They added to our problems. So this 50 million, 60 million, whatever billion pounds it is, you know, they made that situation worse, and they have to take ownership of that.
And that, Angela Richardson, is a fair accusation, isn't it?
Well, I was thinking about places like Doncaster.
No, just answer that point. That is a fair accusation that Kim's just made about that September the 23rd event made it worse. But you could argue that, well, we're the same as other European countries, they're experiencing the same, but that made it worse.
Well, I tell you what, I spent those 4 weeks looking at 30-year gilts and the pound to the dollar, and it was incredibly worrying to the point where I was the fourth member of Parliament who actually said that the former Prime Minister's position was untenable. I think the fact that it was dealt with quickly is credit to Conservative MPs, that it wasn't left to go on. But I think what we have to do is deal with the facts of where we are now and make sure. And can I just say on Doncaster, I think the Conservatives should be proud of the levelling up that they have tried to put in place across the country in communities like that. If you want to talk about our record in government, we've put money into high streets and into towns deals right across places in the country that have not had help.
Do you accept that? I mean, Angela, I think, kind of has accepted the 23rd of September thing. What has been a problem, but they did deal with it quickly, didn't they? Is that any consolation?
It's
to you?
no consolation, because we should never have been in that place in the first place, should we? I mean, we can't. The government just keep making excuses for their bad decisions and their mismanagement of the whole economic situation. You know, the UK is forecast to have the lowest growth in the OECD over the next 2 years. We're behind countries like Italy and Greece. That is not acceptable. So it's all very well turning around now and saying, "Oh, we're really sorry, we made a mess of it." You're running the country. It's just not acceptable.
Italy and Germany have higher inflation than
James.
the UK does at the moment.
Actually, Germany is 0.1% behind us.
Is it?
Yeah, sorry.
I kind of feel awful to agree with different bits of what you just. So, we haven't suddenly discovered that there's a massive hole in the public finances that we didn't know existed before. We have spent a hell of a lot during the pandemic, in particular during the pandemic, supporting people. What's happened since Rishi Sunak as Chancellor roughly a year ago stood up and gave his autumn statement is that the fiscal position has dramatically disintegrated through a number of reasons. Significantly because of Ukraine, also because the pound has collapsed through a variety of different reasons. Those two things have been significant drivers of inflation, and that has dramatically eaten into our cost of living. It's also driving a hole in the public. It's also driving a hole in the government spending, and in the economic prospects. Now, there are some things the government has done that make that worse. One you could say is frankly Brexit and the form of Brexit that Boris Johnson concluded, and actually, more to the point, actually the kind of the playing of politics across borders that has damaged, for example, our trade relations. However. The other thing which I think you can't get away from is Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss's event on the 23rd of September. I mean, if you look at 10-year gilts, we're paying 1% more in debt service payments now, after some recovery than we were before Kwarteng stood up. Now that is driving a forecast hole in the economy, which unfortunately, because of the extra scrutiny that he invited, Hunt is now having to go overboard to fix. And I think there was a way that, I don't think anyone could not sympathise with Truss and Kwarteng's want to drive more growth. That's a perfectly sensible thing to want to achieve. There is a way they could have achieved what they wanted to achieve without attracting the scrutiny and frankly, the drama that has created a lot of this situation.
I should say on Thursday we have an extra cross question this week because we have are we calling it the budget or the autumn statement? Whatever we're calling it, that's happening on Thursday lunchtime, and we will have a specialist panel of financial experts with us on Thursday evening, including Ian McCafferty, which if you've heard him on my programme before, you'll know that he explains complicated economic things in a way that I can only dream of. He just sort of makes it relatable, which I think is a real talent for somebody who used to be on the Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee. But so we're looking forward to that on Thursday evening. More of your questions to come, 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to ask our panel a question over the next half an hour, it's 8:32. News headlines on LBC with Charlotte Morgan.
Rishi Sunak says he's confident a new deal between the UK and France will reduce the number of asylum seekers crossing the Channel. More police officers, money and technology will be allocated to help stop people smuggling gangs. Labour MP Kim Leadbeater has told LBC's Iain Dale on Cross Question her party would fully support safe routes of passage to deter people from making the dangerous journey. Dominic Raab's office says he holds himself to the highest standards of professionalism after 8 of his former staff reported being bullied. They'd been working under the then Foreign Secretary in 2019. Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping has condemned Russia's nuclear threats to Ukraine. The leaders met for the first time since the US president came to office almost 2 years ago, ahead of a G20 summit in Indonesia. LBC weather, wet and windy in western areas overnight, lows of 8. Outbreaks of rain from the west tomorrow, drier and brighter later in Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England, highs of 13 Celsius.
LBC Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
We're with Kim Leadbeater, Angela Richardson, James Dowling and Aubrey Allegretti. They're here to take your calls, 0345 6060 973. Before we continue, though, I have to apologise to Kim, because I said we hadn't had the third quarter figures yet, but we have, and you were right. And Angela, you were sort of slightly right, but also sort of slightly wrong, because we've got a text here from somebody who says, I'm looking at the current OECD economic outlook for 2023, and Germany is clearly forecast to do less well than the UK, with a 0.7% contraction. I think you said 0.6%, so you were undercooking your own argument.
Oh, well, I'll do better next time.
Yeah, but who's the text from? Is it Jeremy Hunt?
Well, he does listen to this programme occasionally, I know. Jane is in York and has texted this. Is there any point in the G20 summits? I think they're an expensive waste of time. Now, I've never been to one of these summits. Have you, Aubrey, as a journalist?
I did a lot of EU Council summits.
Oh, poor you.
Not the
Thoughts and
G20
prayers.
ones, yes. Very late nights.
Are they a waste of time?
I find it quite positive that there is some forum on which the sort of leader of the 20 biggest economies in the world are forced to kind of sit in a room together and thrash things out. Now, the question really is about whether or not it's worth the cost and whether or not they're actually sort of relatively productive. And it feels like this year, the struggle to get anything agreed in the joint communique that's going to be issued at the end suggests that actually there's probably fairly little reason in terms of being able to kind of agree anything substantial. However, does it suit the UK, for example, to be able to put on a relatively united front against Russia with the notable absence of Vladimir Putin? Yes, it absolutely does. It makes him look incredibly isolated. So I think on that front it does. It also sometimes helps leaders and prime ministers to be out of the country. Things in Parliament tend to sort of calm down a little bit. MPs tend to sort of get a little bit calmer. So I think the Conservative Party is probably feeling a little bit grateful that Rishi Sunak's over there, kind of on the world stage, looking like a statesman.
I'm not sure Dominic Raab is feeling very grateful that he's over there, because he's got to do PMQs, and with all these bullying allegations, I suspect that might be more interesting than usual.
The Prime Minister for there to be sort of various lightning rods in the cabinet that can attract this attention.
James, ever attended an international summit?
I had the dubious pleasure of doing numerous EU meetings during the Brexit process, which was an experience. But I think there is real value in leaders having FaceTime with each other. So I'm a bit more cynical about the kind of moment at the end where they read out a bureaucratically agreed communique. But actually, we would do a lot of bilaterals with, I was working with David Gauke as Justice Minister with his opposite numbers. And actually, the ability for senior ministers to spend time with each other and develop a rapport is incredibly helpful, both on the kind of moment at issue, whether you're talking Brexit or something else, but it allows you also to pick up the phone to them about other things. So, there's a lot of discussion about, prison reform, for example. We did quite a lot of work with the German government, looking at the way they ran their prisons, which is very different from here. But that is all built on the kind of fundamental, the ability to spend time with each other and personal chemistry. And there are very few fora that you can do that as a leader at the top of government, apart from some of these events and, I suppose, diplomatic visits.
Kim?
I've never been to a global summit. You might be surprised to hear. Yet? Watch this space. I think Aubrey and James have both made really good points there. I'm generally not a fan of meetings for the sake of meetings, but in terms of relationship building on a global stage, that is, as Aubrey's alluded to, more important than ever, particularly with the dreadful war in Ukraine. And I think that relationship building going forward is really important. It goes back to, are we an outward-looking country or are we an inward-looking country? So I think it's important, but I think we also need to be looking at, every meeting that takes place, what are the outcomes from it, what are the benefits for the UK from those meetings, and maybe there needs to be a little bit of a tighter rein kept on that side of things.
And I always think that if world leaders have met each other face to face and had conversations, they're actually less likely to drop bombs on each other.
I think that's probably a fair comment. Yeah, absolutely.
If we think back to 1984, when Margaret Thatcher met Mikhail Gorbachev for the first time at Chequers, and she said afterwards, he's a man we can do business with, and recommended that Ronald Reagan talk to him. And we all know what flowed from all of that. And okay, that may be a sort of the most brilliant example that you can come up with, but
Bush said something similar about Putin, of course.
Pardon?
Bush said something similar about Putin, of course.
Did he? trust you to ruin the party.
Exceptions
isn't
to every
around
rule.
anymore, so maybe we should have kept him in place for 20
But I think
years.
you're right, and I think it's a really important point. Whatever's going on in politics, whether it's globally, nationally, locally, there are human beings at the centre of it. So the importance of human connection, from my perspective, should never be underestimated.
Angela.
So I've never been to any of these sorts of summits. I think we watch them. I think what's really important is it's about our global partnerships. It's about talking to our allies and reconfirming the commitments that we've made. It's about talking to countries that we hope to do trade deals with in the future, and that's a really important thing. Countries like India and Indonesia. There may be there's a bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping, which I think would be a really helpful thing to do in the current set of circumstances in the world that we face. So even though China doesn't share our values, I think we should always continue talking to them and trying to make progress. And I think, yes...
Even when they're committing genocide against the Uyghurs?
I think... the atrocities that are being committed against the Uyghur people are just disgraceful, and parliamentarians have been sanctioned for calling that out. But I'm sure our diplomats will keep channels of communication open. I was quite heartened to see China push back against some of the rhetoric that Russia had been using around the use of nuclear weapons. I think that was a helpful thing to do on the global stage. That shows leadership in and of itself.
OK, let's quickly move on to another question. I want fairly brief answers from you all on this one, if we can. An Alexa question from Andrew in Brighton. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has confirmed that he is going to Qatar for the World Cup, despite all the concerns about gay and other human rights issues. Should he be going? James?
Yes, I think so. For the same reasons we've just been talking about. A lot of his opposite numbers will be going, and I think it's another opportunity.
It's a football tournament. Why does the Foreign Secretary need to go to a football tournament? I can think of the Minister for Sport having a reason for going.
I mean, I can't abide football. I'm not the person to ask on this. But
well, he's claimed today that he's basically going to ensure that the Britons who are visiting overseas remain safe. So that's why he
Isn't
said
that the job of the British Embassy in Qatar?
I think he probably feels like maybe it sort of takes on a higher degree of relevance, and that the Qatari authorities will feel him sort of breathing down the
But
necks.
the fact that he said that indicates that there's a possibility that they might not be, which is a good reason for the tournament not to be held there in the first place. But that ship has sailed. Angela, are you a football fan?
Rugby and cricket coming from New Zealand, and my local football teams. I don't have a national football team, but I think...
New Zealand does have an international football team. It's played in the World Cup fairly recently.
Yes, but as I was growing up, I don't think it ever managed to get into the... what is it called?
World Cup final.
No, not the final. New Zealand in the World Cup final?
Yeah, they've been in the World Cup finals. Winston Reid, who played for West Ham, he played for New Zealand in the World Cup finals would have been 2010, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
In football?
Delighted to educate you about your own national team.
Well, my national team is now England, I suppose.
Of course, she said hastily.
But I know the passion that the people of this country hold for the beautiful game, and I think it's right that the Foreign Secretary is going along with the Sports Minister, who is the first openly gay Sports Minister that we've ever had. And safety is important. I don't think it sends the message that people aren't going to be safe, but safety is a priority, of course, for the Foreign Office everywhere in the world. And I think we just want to encourage people to enjoy the spectacle that is football. And it's just important that we continue to keep lines of communication open with the Qataris before the event, during the event, and after the event, because these conversations are ongoing.
Just as a point of information, Chris, my producer, says New Zealand have qualified for the finals twice, 1982 and 2010. So I was right.
Really?
On 2010. I got something right in this programme, so that's, I don't have to apologise for anything.
Well, I used to play football at primary school with the boys. Loved it. We called it soccer. But it wasn't ever something that we could aspire to in that sort of way as the All Blacks.
Well, you were lucky because in this country at that time, girls were prevented from playing football in schools, but I think that has changed now.
Yeah,
right, we're going to move on in a second to some more questions. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:46.
LBC.
questions.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Aubrey, Allegretti, James Dowling, Angela Richardson and Kim Leadbeater are here. I've never had to apologise to anyone twice on a programme before, but I owe Kim Leadbeater another apology because I didn't bring her in on the World Cup question.
I'm starting to take it personally. Ian.
No offence. Carry on.
Right, World Cup. Well, I'm glad you've given me a chance to say my piece on this because I'm back in desk-banging territory. As a massive sports fan and a big football fan, although there is a debate to be had around that as a Huddersfield Town season ticket holder. But I'm a massive sport fan, whether it's the Rugby League World Cup that we've just had, whether it's celebrating the fantastic victory of England cricket at the weekend. You know, sport is something that brings people together. It's a really powerful global tool for sending positive messages. And the fact of the matter is Qatar should never have been given the World Cup. And I don't think the Foreign Secretary should be going. I play on the...
Do you think Mark Drakeford should be going, the First Minister of Wales? Because, of course, Wales are taking part too.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, isn't it? And I think, to be fair to James Cleverly, to be fair to Mark Drakeford, I would imagine that is a very difficult decision to make. They should never have been put in that position of having to make that decision as far as I'm concerned. We were invited to go. I play on the fantastic all-women's, cross-party parliamentary football team.
What are you called?
I think we're probably called, sadly, the all-party parliamentary women's football team.
I was just thinking there has to be an equivalent of lionesses or something.
Do you know what? And you're right about that.
Yeah.
We need to get ourselves a snazzy name, don't we?
Or something
But it's a genuine all-party group. So Tracy Crouch, Ali McGovern are the co-captains, and we have MPs from the SNP who play. And it's women coming together across parliamentary divides to play sport. And I think it's really powerful. But we had an interesting debate on our WhatsApp group about whether we should go to Qatar, and there was a small discussion around whether we would be making a point by going, but actually the consensus in the end was no, absolutely not. Whether it's the human rights record, whether it's the LGBTQ plus regime that they have there, you know, we shouldn't be putting a highlight on a country like that. We shouldn't be giving them the spotlight. The fact that we've got, was it the Qatari ambassador to FIFA saying that homosexuality is damage of the mind? It's 2022, for goodness sake. And I just feel so sad that me and many of my friends and colleagues are now having to think about whether they even watch the matches because of what's happened. And as I say, as a massive sport fan, that makes me very sad.
Just a little bit of breaking news. If you're a fan of US talk shows, Jay Leno has been seriously burned after his car burst into flames in the garage of his home. And he's a serious car collector. So, I mean, that's a horrible thing to happen to anyone. We'll see if we can get more details on that a little bit later. Right, let's go to another question. It's from David in Hampstead. Hello, David.
Hi, Ian. Great show.
Hi.
My question to the panel is, what are both the main parties, Labour and Conservative, going to do to win over disenfranchised business owners at the next election? Because both parties at the moment are pretty much anti-business.
Just expand on that a little bit. Are you a small business owner yourself?
Yes, I'm 30 years old. I started the business with no funding, nothing. It's now employing people. It's thankfully successful. And all really we get from both parties is pretty much copy and paste of each other, in that the Conservatives say we're going to raise taxes, more, squeeze. And the Labour Party say, you know, hold our beer, we're going to do it better than you and raise your taxes even more. And quite frankly, as a business owner, it's disheartening and it's the most anti-business I've ever seen.
Angela Richardson, the Tory party is traditionally seen as the party of business, particularly small business. I mean, that's quite disturbing to hear David think like he does.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that, David. I think our record during the pandemic in particular, we tried to do as much as we could to help businesses survive the pandemic. I think we would have seen a lot more businesses go to the wall and huge numbers of unemployment. And we managed to, by giving bounce back loans and putting support system in place for businesses to see them through.
Well, if they're limited companies, but there were 3 million people that didn't get anything, weren't there, as you would well know from your postbag.
Yeah, and it was incredibly difficult. And, you know, I haven't heard from them recently, but I did hear from them an awful lot during the pandemic. And it was incredibly difficult with the tax system to be able to get support in the same way. And, of course, people who had limited companies were able to benefit in ways that people who were employed through PAYE weren't able to over potentially a longer course of their business. But we did put that support in place. We are the party of small business. I think we're proud of that reputation. I think it's really important, though, at the moment that people understand
Hang on a second, because David, I imagine, issued a hollow laugh when you said that. When the Conservatives introduced IR35, they've introduced the loan charge. They've increased small business taxes. I mean, it's a joke to say the Conservative Party is a party of small business.
No, I don't think so. I think that we continue to support businesses and we will look at everything that we can do to do that. But we are in a particular economic situation at the moment that is going to be difficult for any political party to tackle in a way that supports everybody. And we've got 2 years until the next election. That was the sort of subtext of the question, what are you going to do to support us? So I think it's important that over the next couple of years that we tackle inflation and that we get some stability into the economy, because businesses need stability as much as families do to be able to plan, to be able to invest and grow their businesses. I do talk to business owners quite a lot as a constituency MP, and at the moment they're slightly worried that we're not going to have an optimistic message, and they feel optimistic about what is possible. So I think we oughtn't to do the country down, we oughtn't to do small businesses down, nor the Conservative government. We've got to get through this period, tackle inflation, and put policies in place that will be attractive to small businesses come the next general election in 2024.
Kim.
I'm really proud of the work that Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, and Pat McFadden, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, have been doing around small businesses. And I think the Labour Party is in a really positive position now in that we know we can be the party of business and we can be the party of the workforce as well. And I think we need to start looking at the taxes that are paid by big global businesses and making it a fairer system so that they pay more and small businesses pay less. So we look at fixing business rates that are going to get our high streets thriving again. That's a really important part of Labour's plan. Looking at the startup review, which will enable people to start businesses more successfully and help us to make Britain the best place to start a business. But I think this thing around, global businesses and the tax that they pay would bring billions of pounds back into the economy if we have a fairer taxation system.
Okay.
I think the other thing is that we need to listen to small businesses. And I know, as I say, Rachel Reeves has done a huge amount of work on this. And I'm sure if David wanted to get in touch, she'd be very happy to have a conversation.
Because Johnny Reynolds is your Shadow Business Secretary, not Rachel Reeves.
Well, you can speak to Johnny or Rachel. I'm sure that both be happy to have a conversation.
Would you commit now to at least reforming IR35? Would you commit to abolishing the loan charge? Because there are many, many small businesses that find those two pieces of legislation completely iniquitous.
Well, I am not the Shadow Chancellor, nor am I the Shadow Business Secretary.
Would you like to see them
I'd like to see a fairer taxation system. I'd like to see fairer looking after small business. I think it's really important. But the Labour Party are very, very clear about that, and that is something we are focusing on. And I can certainly take that back to the Treasury team after tonight and make sure that David's voice
30 seconds each from our non-party political panellists here. Aubrey first.
So obviously the government's got to be really careful that anything that it does doesn't risk choking off any kind of recovery even more. I think the other thing to say is they realise they're between a rock and a hard place, and that they will have made the situation harder by promising this kind of stream of deregulation in the mini budget, which some businesses will have welcomed because they will have seen that as an opportunity to increase their sort of their customer base and bring them more staff. But obviously that hasn't happened anymore. So the Conservatives, on very sort of tricky footing, and if they are losing that mantle of being the party of business among small business owners, then that means that they have a very long way to claw back before they stand a chance of getting power again.
James.
Taxes are going up. That is the reality of what we're facing and what we're going to see on Thursday. And it's not true, by the way, to say that big business are paying less than small business. Rishi Sunak instituted the small profits tax, reintroduced it. They are paying less tax as a headline rate than big business. Small businesses are. What the government needs to do is to combine increased taxes, bluntly, with a better offer for business as a whole, a more stable environment, an economy that works, an economy where you can actually ensure and be sure that if you invest, you actually and work hard, you get what you want.
Neil says, why do I, as a small business owner, have to absorb 19 to 25% tax increase in corporation tax? And I've had no support from the government. Well, you're actually wrong. If you're making under 250,000, I think it's staying at 19%. Yeah. I'm looking at
small profit. It's the small profit tax.
That's right, isn't it? Right, final text question from Christian in Salford. Jeff Bezos has vowed to give away most of his fortune over the course of his life and is donating $100 million now to none other than Dolly Parton. What a way to make a living. Which music star would you pass your cash on to if you had the means to? We should explain Dolly Parton has a massive charitable foundation. You wonder what I was going to say there, didn't you? OK, which music star would you like to pass your cash on to, Aubrey?
I'm not sure. I can't think of any. I haven't got that much cash to give away to these people.
You might have one day, you never know.
If I can fly to the moon, yeah.
All right, you've got a few seconds to think of someone. Angela?
Chris Martin and Coldplay.
Why?
Because he's awesome.
Kim?
Well, I think most sort of successful pop stars at the minute have probably got plenty of money, but I might look at doing some sort of 80s pop revival. So I'd look about the old groups from the 80s, which I love.
Kajagoogoo, give it to them.
Kajagoogoo, bit of Tapow. Pet Shop Boys are still going strong, I believe. Deacon Blue, Duran Duran, people like that. So we could do an 80s revival. But actually, what I'd actually do is I'd look at small bands in Batley and Spen and look at how I'd give them a bit of cash. Because, we've got to look at grassroots
any small
music
band
industry.
in Batley and Spen?
There is a fantastic band called the Gods of Fortune, who are brilliant.
Should get them on.
James?
No rock star is going to notice any money I give them, but I love Guns N' Roses, so Axl Rose.
Okay.
For no
I can't believe
reason.
none of you mentioned Cliff Richard, with whom I have an exclusive interview in a few weeks' time. I should say. Right, thank you all very much indeed. Kim Leadbeater, Angela Richardson, James Dowling and Aubrey Allegretti. We have another cross question tomorrow night, of course. In a moment, we're going to talk about foreign languages because the government wants us all to speak more German, which I, of course, as a fluent German speaker, think is a fantastic idea. But why has foreign language teaching really hit rock bottom in this country over the last 20 years? It's not just over the last few years. This has been happening for the last 20 or 30 years. And should we be encouraging more kids to learn languages in schools? 0345 6060 973. It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, refugee charities, Labour and even some Tory MPs have criticised a new deal aimed at reducing the number of migrants crossing the Channel in small boats. The £63 million deal with France will boost beach patrols, but there are claims the measures fall short of tackling people smuggling gangs. Labour MP Kim Leadbeater has told LBC safe routes of passage is one of the key solutions. But former government special advisor James Dowling told Iain Dale on Cross Question the country simply isn't equipped enough to deal